Hello, my friends. How are you? Welcome to another episode of 30 Albums for 30 Years. I am your host, Jay Sweet. Of course, you know the premise. In this podcast, I evaluate the 30 most impactful albums during each year, starting in 1964 and hopefully ending in 1994. So here's a good one today. Bob Dylan, Bringing It All Back Home, released March 22nd, 1965, recorded January 13th through the 15th, 1965, Columbia Records. Let's get into it. Bob Dylan, Bringing It All Back Home. All right, guys, so I've already covered Bob Dylan's early years in the season one. I did two Dylan albums. The first was The Times They Are Changing, and the second was Another Side of Bob Dylan. So I would refer you to those episodes to learn more about Dylan's early years. And we're just going to pick it up with this album, Bringing It All Back Home, which is Bob Dylan's fifth studio release. The album was definitely a transitional album for Bob Dylan, showing two sides of the artist and his internal musical struggle. So Dylan was inspired by the Beatles and electric blues around this time. He had the desire to strap on electric guitar and rock out a little bit, but yet he was considered the greatest acoustic folk artist of his day, and his core fans of college radicals wanted more folky acoustic protest music with profound lyrics. So he kind of appeased them. So for the first side of the record, Dylan jams out on some electric music, and for the second side, side two, he returns to his acoustic roots, but moves a little bit away from his protagonistic spirit. He's not singing as much protest music at this time. At this point, he had grown somewhat tired of being the educator of an entire generation, and he wanted to focus a little bit more on being a traditional songwriter instead. Despite being somewhat schizophrenic as an album, that electric and acoustic dynamic, the record did relatively well, actually really well. It peaked at number 6 on the Billboard charts, and it was Dylan's first top 10 record. And the UK, it peaked at number 1. As for sales, it went platinum in the United States and gold in the UK. Many believe the record to be his best, and it is often cited as one of the most influential albums of that time. Leading up to the recording of Bringing It All Back Home, Bob Dylan was hanging around Woodstock in the summer of 1964, and he was sitting in front of his typewriter a lot and writing many lyrics in a stream of conscious type state. Later in the summer, he met with the Beatles for the first time in New York City. Supposedly, he gave them their first joints. They were hanging out, getting high. It was a relationship that deeply impacted Bob Dylan and a connection that he continued and cherished his connection with the Beatles. He was also excited about electric blues music, particularly the music of John P. Hammond, the son of John H. Hammond, the musical visionary who first signed Dylan to Columbia Records. The first acoustic session was made on January 13th, 1965, and the next day he brought in the rock band. Some of the members include Al Gorgoni, Kenny Rankin, and Bruce Langhorne on guitars, pianist Paul Griffin, bassist Joseph Macho Jr., and William E. Lee, and drummer Bobby Craig. So the group laid down the tracks quickly, and they were back at it the next day to finish the record, and boom, 3 days, classic album is made. Pretty remarkable. Following the record's release, Bob Dylan fully dug his heels into electric music, which caused a great controversy for the singer. On July 25th, 1965, he performed his first electric concert at Newport Folk Festival, and this was perceived by many as a big FU to the fans who hung on his every word and his prophecies as an acoustic folk artist. They wanted him to continue to do that. So many fans who did not appreciate his new direction rebelled, and they booed the singer. They called him a sellout. They called him a Judas. But Dylan was ultra rebellious. Dylan was ultra rebellious, and he countered Bringing It All Back Home with two more electric albums, both masterworks, One is called Highway 61 Revisited, which we will visit later in this series, and also the record Blonde on Blonde, which he released in 1966. So now let's just get into some of the tracks. Let's drop the needle on side 1, track 1. The tune is Subterranean Homesick Blues. It's a good one. It's Dylan's first top 40 hit in the US, and it's one of my personal favorite Bob Dylan songs. It was notable for its music video as well, in which Dylan holds up cue cards with the many, many lyrics to the song. The tune was inspired by and borrowed from the words and the music of people such as Jack Kerouac, Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger, and particularly musically, it was inspired by the Chuck Berry song, Too Much Monkey Business. The song makes many references to drugs, a bohemian lifestyle, the turmoil surrounding the Vietnam War, police violence, a far-left organization called the Weather Underground, and much, much more. The title pays tribute to Jack Kerouac's book, The Subterraneans. This bluesy tune is essentially a glimpse into the many thoughts of a brilliant mind, which was, of course, Bob Dylan. Subterranean Homesick Blues. Dylan Goes Electric. Check it out. Track number 2 is She Belongs to Me. There is much speculation as to who the she is in the song. Bob Dylan had quite a few relationships around this time. It could be about his former girlfriend Suze Rotolo, or fellow folk singer Joan Baez, with whom he had a relationship. Could also be German singer, songwriter, model Nico from the Velvet Underground. He dated her a little bit, and also Sarah Louds. It could be about Sarah Louds, the woman Dylan would wed in November 1965. The two had 4 children before they split in 1977. Now, surprisingly, it's none of these women who are on the album cover. Instead, it is Sally Grossman who is on the cover. Sally Grossman was the wife of Dylan's manager, Albert Grossman. The song has a pretty solid groove, and it has some nice lead guitar work as well. And of course, Dylan has to play the harmonica on this one, and if you know from listening to season number 1, Dylan's harmonica playing can irk me just a little bit. But check it out, track number 2, She Belongs to Me. Maggie's Farm is our next track. The literal lyrics to the song make it pretty clear that Dylan does not want to work for Maggie or any of her family members. If we look past the literal meanings, the lyrics may represent Bob Dylan's desire to move away from the constructs of folk ideals and the box they placed him in. The track may be his announcement that he wants to make a break from his current image and acoustic folk music. It may also be a statement regarding the struggles associated with the American work environment and mentality. Musically, the song is pure electric blues. It was Dylan's performance with the Paul Butterfield Blues Band on the more up-tempo version of Maggie's Farm at the Newport Folk Festival that caused the outrage I talked about in the intro. Maggie's Farm was released as a single in the UK and is one of the strongest cuts on the record, and it was done in just one take. Maggie's Farm. Up next is Love Minus Zero. The song uses surreal imagery. Some authors and critics believe that the song was inspired in part by Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. The final lines of the song are, "My love, she's like some raven, at my window with a broken wing." Others have suggested that it pays tribute to the biblical book of Daniel. And critics have also remarked that the style of the lyrics are somewhat reminiscent of William Blake's poem, The Sick Rose. Dylan obviously is an excellent lyricist, And really, the song might have nothing to do with any of these works. It may just be a product of his mind and his pure genius. He's a little catty about a lot of his songs, so don't really know. You decide. Love minus 0. Track number 5 is Outlaw Blues. This is an electric blues reflection of a fugitive on the run who stumbles into a cold, muddy lagoon. Things aren't going great for this guy. He wishes he had a place that he can call his home, somewhere he can settle back down, where he can hang some pictures. He also fantasizes about being on some Australian mountain range to be free of running. He also misses his woman. So being a fugitive doesn't sound so great. Dylan recorded an acoustic version of the song for these sessions. He stuck with the electric version for the album. The acoustic version was later released in 2005, Outlaw Blues. Track number 6 is another blues called On the Road Again. The lyrics reflect the absurdities of a bohemian lifestyle and the possible dealings of some nutty in-laws. It's blues as only Bob Dylan could do it. The song is On the Road Again. Check it out. The final track of side number 1, the electric side on the original LP, is Bob Dylan's 115th Dream. Bob Dylan obviously dreams and thinks a lot. And like many dreams, this one gets a little wacky. In it, Dylan combines elements of Christopher Columbus's travels, the voyage of the Mayflower, and Captain Ahab's adventures from the book Moby Dick. None of them are related at all. The song is basically a lengthy rant with some historical references, short story ideas, unique imagery. It's somewhat like a psychedelic, drug-induced mind adventure. He tried the song first as an acoustic track before recording the electric version of the tune. That's the version we're listening to today. The track begins with a botched false start, probably from the acoustic attempt. And after he makes an apparent mistake, Bob Dylan cracks himself up. And it's not the first time we've heard him laughing on record. I don't really know what's so funny about it, but he thought it was cool to leave it on there. So there's a good amount of instrumental layering behind Dylan's lyrics. Sometimes we forget about the music when we're listening to Dylan because the lyrics are so unique and so much a part of the overall presentation, but take notice of the music as well. So Bob Dylan's 115th Dream, kind of wonder what the 114th was like and what the 116th was like, but we get to know about the 115th. So here it is. All right, let's flip the record. Let's drop the needle on side number 2. This is the acoustic side where Dylan returns to his folk roots. And track number 1 is brilliant. It's Mr. Tambourine Man, one of Bob Dylan's most beloved songs. The Byrds did a folk rock remake of the song later in the year, which reached number 1. We'll talk about that in a future episode. It was, however, not a hit for Bob Dylan. It wasn't even a single. Musically, the track includes only Bob Dylan strumming the acoustic guitar and Bruce Langhorne playing lead guitar behind the verses. And then, of course, Dylan has to play the harmonica. The lyrics are among Dylan's most discussed, and many believe it's about drugs. But Dylan has denied that. But again, he's kind of catty about a lot of his lyrics. He was smoking a decent amount of pot at the time of the writing of Mr. Tambourine Man, but he did not discover hallucinogenics till a few months later when he kind of started to do some LSD. Now, some think the song may also be about religion and transcending. Sometimes I think, that Dylan just strings together words remarkably and leaves the meaning up to the listener. Sometimes I'm not even positive he knows what he's writing about. But either way, his lyrics always sound important, and the vagueness is part of his genius as a lyricist and a songwriter. So I hope you enjoy Mr. Tambourine Man. Track number 2 of side number 2 is Gates of Eden. It's Bob Dylan alone, and that's how many people like him best. Again, the song's lyrics appear to be part of a dreamlike state and a search for paradise in an otherwise decaying world. But honestly, who knows what the hell he's talking about sometimes. It's a great mind exercise to try to figure it out, though, and I often find that with Dylan's lyrics, you can almost interpret each verse as a song within a song. I think really he's just brighter than most of us, certainly myself, and his mind works differently. I interpret the lyrics to mean that all the conversations we have, the political turmoil, the thoughts, and the absurdities of the world mean nothing when we pass. You check it out. You let me know. Gates of Eden. This next track is It's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding. It's absolutely incredible, and I believe it to be one of his greatest works. Like many genius works of art, you can find new meaning and interpretation each time you view or listen to it. This over 7-minute long song has a contemplative and overall negative tone, and I think the lyrics are basically a commentary on American ideals. And like any great orator, Dylan lands on some memorable lines and phrases. I'm going to share some of my favorites with you now. The first one being, he not busy being born is busy dying. Next up, don't fear if you hear a foreign sound to your ear. Hate nothing at all except hatred. It is easy to see without looking, for that much is really sacred. Here's my favorite. Even the President of the United States sometimes must have to stand naked. This one's particularly fitting. It is not they, or them, or it that you belong to. It might even be a reference to pronoun controversies. Not sure. The master makes the rules for the wise man or the fools. Let me keep going. I know I sound like a fortune cookie here. One who sings with his tongue on fire gargles in the rat race choir. Just a few more. Money doesn't talk, it swears obscenities. And finally, if my thought dreams could be seen, they'd probably put my head in a guillotine. Now, the imagery of a son explaining his concerns, fears, and pain to his mother is quite poignant, especially because she brought him into the decaying world. So the narrator keeps telling his mother, it's all right, Ma, it's all right, I'm only, and then he adds a lyric, Ma, it's all right, I'm only sighing. Ma, it's all right, I can make it. Ma, it's all right, I got nothing to live up to. Ma, it's all right if I can't please him. And Ma, it's all right, it's life and life only. It's all right, Ma, I'm only bleeding. I hope you enjoy this track as much as I do. Check it out. The final track on the original LP is It's All Over Now, Baby Blue. Here Dylan performs along with bassist William E. Lee. Those are the only two musicians on the track. The song's chorus references the end of a relationship. Bob Dylan scholars have tried to figure out who Baby Blue was. One person who it could be is folk singer Joan Baez. Dylan and Baez were still in a relationship when Bob Dylan wrote this song. Another possibility is singer-songwriter David Blue. Blue was a friend of Dylan from his days in New York City's Greenwich Village scene, and it could be him. Another possibility is that the subject is folk singer Paul Clayton. Clayton and Dylan were close friends throughout 1964, and Clayton had accompanied Dylan on the famous road trip that produced songs like Chimes of Freedom and Mr. Tambourine Man. But by 1965, it's been said that Clayton was using amphetamines, which made him somewhat difficult to be around, and his relationship with Bob Dylan may have been fractured at this time. The song could also be just a combination of a bunch of individuals, the ones we discussed and some others as well. We don't really know. Another interpretation of the song is that it's directed to Dylan's audience, his folk music audience. The song was written at a time when he was moving away from the folk protest movement musically, and the song can be seen as a farewell to those days, his days as an acoustic guitar playing protest singer. Dylan's choosing to play It's All Over Now, Baby Blue as his last acoustic song at the infamous Newport Folk Festival of 1965 seems to support that theory. Nonetheless, it's a pretty cool song. It's All Over Now, Baby Blue. All right, cats, we did it. We made it to the end of the record. I think we're better for it. Let's lift the needle off that record and we'll put it away. You're going to want to come back to this one, I'm sure. And in conclusion, Bob Dylan's Bringing It All Back Home is a masterpiece and one of the most essential albums of Dylan's career. And it shows that he was never comfortable at being comfortable, and that he was willing to take a greater risk by incorporating more rock and blues elements into his music during a time when really most people didn't want that from him. His combination of poetry and prose blended with easily accessible musical elements brings listeners back to bringing it all back home again and again. All right, there we have it. That's today's program. Before I fully sign off, I do want to pay a quick tribute to Robbie Robertson, recently passed on. Robbie Robertson was, of course, the primary songwriter and guitarist in the group The Band, and served as Bob Dylan's guitar player during much of this electric period. He was his touring guitar player. They made some records together, and we're going to hear the name Robbie Robertson quite a bit as this show progresses. So rest in peace, Robbie Robertson. Thank you for the incredible music. Now, if you want to learn more about the program, you can go to 30albumsfor30years.com. You can also check us out on social media. And I do have a book, A History of American Music, 1750 through 1950, an origin story. So that's available through Kendall Hunt Publishing. So together, let's keep this music alive. I hope you have a wonderful day. Peace.